When you go to the grocery store, the avocados really suck.
Nobody understands that. I sit there in Whole Foods and me and everyone else is looking at the avocados. Nobody knows what's right or what's not.
Yeah, exactly. I'll go to the store, I'll buy 5 avocados. 2 of them go bad before I can unpack my bag. And then the other sit on the shelf for, weeks and weeks. So unless my entire life is based around avocados, I tend to create food waste. And so that makes me feel bad. It's expensive.
Jerry Seinfeld talks about how stuff you bring into your house is simply in some state of becoming garbage, no matter what it is. We're here with Katherine Sizov of Strella Biotech. She's joining us today from Seattle. And I understand there's a big fruit conference coming up in about a week out in your neck of the woods there.
Yep, it's the start of the season here, a little bit before cherries. So we are going to be attending a conference to chat with all the apple and pear packers out here in Washington.
Great. Well, that's the business we're here to talk about today. So you're very enthusiastic about the freshness of these types of fruits.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. My business is all around predicting the shelf life of different types of produce. And we started in the apple and pear industry about 5 years ago, and have since then tackled a whole bunch of other fruits and vegetables.
I'm interested to hear about that growth. So how this all got started is you were going to your microbiology studies at Penn. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was studying neuroscience at Penn, and I had been working in a lab quite a bit, actually, and really enjoyed biology. But one of the things that I didn't feel super interested in pursuing was a PhD at the end of the day. I wanted to be out in the field, be out in the real world. And as much as I love bench work, I figured that I wanted to work on something a little bit more actionable.
Well, the food supply is both actionable and something that's rewarding. In leading up to our discussion, as you understood some of the food waste that our world sees, that you were taken aback by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I read a paper that 40% of all food is wasted before it's consumed, as I was procrastinating for grad school applications, and thought that that was such a ridiculous and crazy number. And then immediately felt kind of a little bit of guilt, because I didn't actually really know where my food came from. I still know very little about where a lot of food comes from, but it prompted me to walk to the nearest grocery store, and talk to talk to the lady who was stocking the plums at the time about where the plums came from, and that led me down a really long rabbit hole that eventually became the formation of this company.
So tell us about much of your work is based around sensors. Is that correct? So tell us how this is all done.
Yeah, for sure. So the whole thesis behind what we do is that fruits and vegetables and many different types of food in general are living, breathing organisms at the time that they're in the supply chain. So unlike a typical quote unquote commodity like an iPhone or something that's manufactured, these are organisms. They're living and breathing. And so the idea is to basically create a supply chain around this concept, instead of necessarily treating fruits and vegetables like the commodities that they are. So plants, they talk as they ripen and mature. And basically what our company does is intercept those secret communications between plants as they're ripening and use that data as an input into smarter supply chain decisions. So in colloquial terms, if you've ever put an unripe banana next to a ripe one, you see that ripens faster than if it was by itself. And this is because the bananas are communicating to each other that they are ripe. And so what we do is we take those gas signals and we translate them into an approximation of shelf life. And then we can use that data to make all sorts of different decisions, like ripening bananas better so that you get a nice yellow banana or a nice ripe avocado on the store shelf, or inventory optimization, where you're always moving the most ripe apple down the supply chain to reduce food waste or shrink. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use the understanding of perishability in order to help cut down on that waste, tremendous waste number, or improve the quality of the produce that we eat.
So it's not an old wives' tale that one bad apple spoils the bunch.
Not at all. And that can present a huge challenge. Like one of our applications is actually working in storage rooms for apples. So fun fact, an apple can be over a year old by the time it gets to a grocery store. And apples are stored in these tremendous volumes, like 1 to 5 million apples at once are all stored in these storage rooms for up to a year. And right now, there's a really big problem that one bad apple can spoil the bunch. And so you might put in 90% good fruit into that room and expect it to last for a year. But you might have a really bad batch of apples that cause the whole rest of the fruit to degrade in quality in ways that you weren't initially expecting.
So there's different segments of the chain that you work with here. There's growers, packers, and then the retail side of things. And the probably the term that's used in this industry is shrink, right? So the idea that the number of, say, apples that are ordered as opposed to what ends up actually being sellable on the retail shelves is what's adjusted over time. And you're helping to prevent some of that problem. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that we break down the supply chain is typically by ownership. So exactly as you outlined, depending on where you are, it could be the packer, grower, packer, shipper that owns the fruit. And so when shrink happens, they get that on their bottom line. And so we basically work with everyone who owns an apple or owns a banana as it passes from hand to hand, and ultimately lands at the consumer.
I would think from a marketability of your service that there's probably some, it makes a little bit more sense at the early level when you're dealing with the grower, packer, distributor, things like that. But once it gets to the retail level, are there ways that you can help that part of the chain as well?
Absolutely. So we do a ton of work in banana ripening. So bananas are typically brought green, totally unripe into retail distribution centers, where they're ripened in ripening rooms, and then they're shipped to individual grocery stores. So one of the things that we do is we deploy our sensor technology into these ripening rooms. We can predict how ripe the banana is and how ripe it's going to be using AI tools. And then basically we automate the ripening process. So something that used to be pretty subjective and human based, that required a ton of training and experience, is now something that's fully automated. I would say the positives to working upstream in the supply chain, like packers, is that you have more time to make a decision, right? You might have a full year to make adjustments in inventory on apples, for example. In retail, you're a little bit closer to the final destination. But that being said, the cost of the commodity and the cost of shrink on that commodity is more significant the further you go down the supply chain.
So this is a personal experience. I want you to help me unpeel. No, full pun intended here. So with bananas, sometimes I'll buy them too green, and then they will get to the point where they almost turn like a light colored brown. In other words, they seem to have missed the ripening point. So what's happening in that process that's missing there?
That could be due to a variety of different factors, but oftentimes it is an improper ripening process. Sometimes ripening happens a little bit too quickly for the banana to like. Sometimes you have poor conditions such as high CO2 levels that stress the fruit out. Sometimes you just have problems at the source, at the country of origin. Maybe the pack dates are very old, or the fruit wasn't harvested properly.
So as you're building up data through monitoring the different fruits and hopefully growing into expansion, stuff like that, what are you learning on a large scale of the data that you're picking up through these different customers you have?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different major trends that we've observed. The first one is that data is typically very siloed. And so, for example, a grower might have a ton of knowledge about the fruit that they're growing and producing, but that information is never passed down the supply chain. And so a lot of information is lost as it transfers ownership. Another thing that we've observed is just how much experience and intuition plays into modern day food supply chains. So much of our decisions are based on a person who's worked in the industry for 20 plus years, who lives and breathes whatever commodity they're working with, and we rely very much on that type of knowledge. But it is very difficult to transfer that as well, and also train the future generation of folks who are going to be working in this industry.
Something we probably all understand now about agriculture is what a global business that truly is. There's whether it's just inputs of different crops or the actual and results of fruits, vegetables that are imported to the United States from all around the world. What are some of the divergence of data you see coming from these other countries and these other cultures and practices and things like that?
Yeah, I would say in general, the US is more consolidated than like Europe or other regions. So we have a couple of very large growers, and it does seem like over time we continue to consolidate. Like we're noticing a lot of like PE activity happening or M&A activity happening in ag overall. And so I would say for the most part, the United States is generally more consolidated. I think also in Europe, you'd see a lot more like organic practices and a lot more kind of focus on the health of the product overall. US is generally more volume based processes. So
Why do you think that is? Is that based on consumer tastes that you see those differences between the North American and Western Europe markets?
I think oftentimes the US is just trying to produce more than a lot of European folks. And so when you're trying to create efficiency and optimization, it's a different problem set than if you're, working with 1,000 smaller growers that are producing, on a small number of acres each.
So at Strella, understanding now more about what you do, tell us about how you make money off of this. Tell us about the general revenue model.
Yeah, for sure. So we consider ourselves a hardware enabled SaaS company. So we do have a hardware component, and that is our sensor technology that enables us to collect data on shelf life. But the most important piece of our business is really the actionable data that we generate for our customers. And so typically we price based on access to the data. And our pricing is usually volume based. So we'll charge like a case fee, for example. So per 40 pounds of fruit, or we'll charge based on the size of a room, so like a square footage basis. But generally, it's on a volume basis.
So it seems like you're developing a very scalable type of a business. Talk to us about the global scale of how you think you could integrate this to customers around the world.
Yeah, for sure. So we kind of have three axes of expansion. We've got the supply chain segment, so packing, distribution, wholesale, food service, retail. We've got the commodity. So we've 10 commodities that for us represent a $6 billion total addressable market. And then we've got geography. So we've worked with distributors in order to be able to penetrate other countries that our sales force typically wouldn't be able to. So we're currently active in about 26 countries overall. So expansion consists of determining which points along those three axes are the largest market size, the easiest to adopt from a technological standpoint, and segments where we already have customer relationships. So that's typically how we look at scaling. And then, our pricing models and the way that we approach business are, based on venture growth. So we're a venture backed company, and we seek, hockey stick type growth year over year, alongside significant margins, and the opportunity for a large total addressable market.
So that's from your perspective, in generating revenue and whatnot. How about from a customer perspective? So let's say I'm a large grower and probably integrated packer. Why do I look at this particular product, and how does it mean addressable ROI for me?
Yeah, well, shrink is super expensive, right? I don't think you'll meet a single person in the supply chain that wants to throw away anything. And so what we do is we help reduce that shrink number, and that generates a significant ROI. So for example, in our apple and pear packing business, for every $5,000 a customer spends on our technology, they typically get at least $40,000 in savings on the shrink side overall. And we see nice ROIs across the board for all the customers that we work with.
Is this a very competitive space? Are there a lot of other products out there that do this type of monitoring?
I would say in our space, there are like chemical solutions, for example. So you can extend the shelf life of produce with the application of different types of chemicals. And I would honestly say the biggest competition that we have is just the status quo. Some of the folks that we work with have been doing the same thing for many generations, and have passed down knowledge tribally, really, at the end of the day. And so sometimes it can be difficult to convince a customer to adopt a new technology if they've been operating in a specific way for a really long time.
That seems to be pervasive among much of the agriculture industry.
Yeah, for sure. I can't necessarily say that ag is on the bleeding edge of tech adoption.
Probably one of the reasons why, though, that investors such as myself and others see a lot of opportunity in the ag tech space, because there does seem to be a almost a little bit of a vacuum of people trying new things. So when you find a technology that really works, the adaptation and the growth of that product can be or service can be quite dramatic.
Absolutely, for sure. And there have been numerous examples of that. Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's good because there's opportunity. On the other hand, it does require kind of a shift in perspective from a lot of the industry.
So talk to us a little bit about your team. You are one of the founders, I believe, of Strella,
Mm.
and talk to me about the rest of the team.
Yeah, for sure. So we're a team of 25 overall. We're headquartered in Seattle and we have offices in Philly and Wenatchee as well. We're kind of a combo of like super nerdy people. So we have all sorts of different tech stacks that we operate in. We've got like electrochemists, post-harvest physiologists, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, developers, data scientists. So like what seems like a pretty simple solution or technology is actually pretty complicated in the back end. So we have a whole bunch of technical people, and then we also have a whole bunch of people who know produce in and out and have been born and bred in the industry. And we kind of combine the knowledge of those two spheres in order to be able to do what we do.
What are some needs that you have in growing the business? Maybe their capital, maybe their market needs, maybe their talent needs.
I mean, all three, all of the above. So always seeking, talented folks to join the team. We are going to be raising a Series B in about a quarter or so. And then, always looking for new opportunities, new customers to work with. We are very much an enterprise B2B kind of a business. And so always looking for connections to folks who may be interested in the technology that we provide.
One area that seems to really have some potential for you is just the area of monitoring in general. Can you tell us about where you see some of the growth and monitoring opportunities and maybe some of the new business pathways you think Strella can go down in monitoring?
Yeah, absolutely. So initially, we've worked in apples and bananas, and we're really focused on taking practices that are very much an art and not a science and turning them into a science. But one of the things that we observed is that there is a need for kind of pretty basic tools. There aren't very many, wireless battery powered IoT devices that can be quickly installed in a matter of minutes in our industry that can yield insights in a matter of minutes. So, for example, there are a ton of factors such as ethylene or CO2 or oxygen levels that are super critical to the quality of produce. But oftentimes, warehouse environments have very little insight into those parameters. So, a common practice, for example, is to have a little handheld meter that a human walks around with a couple times a week to make sure everything's looking good. And so, one of the things that we've been offering and we're seeing quite a bit of takeoff on is just simply being able to measure once every hour or once every 15 minutes all of the basic things that impact the quality of your produce in your warehouse. And so we call that monitoring. It's very straightforward. It's applicable to all commodities, and even past produce. It's applicable to applications and meat and seafood. And so that's been like kind of a little bit of a dark horse, if you will. We weren't expecting that particular line to take off the way that it has, but we're really excited to use it as a foray into other technology solutions that we have with a broader range of customers.
When you talk about that optimal environment, it kind of inspires me to think about something. So most of my 31 years, I've been an investor generally in the real estate business. And about 15 years ago or so, I had a very large customer of mine that owned some warehouses in Volgograd, Russia. And it was an old industrial site that he was looking to repurpose. And at the time, he was considering the idea of indoor greenhouses because he had a low cost of energy. But something we determined as being in this industrial area, the, just the different chemicals around the area and the air pollution and things like that were happening in the area were really not conducive to the growing. So, as you point out, in real estate, they always talk about location, location, location. Well, in growing, having that optimal environment for growing is also very important.
Oh, 100%. And it's always interesting to
And
see.
not only growing, but other parts of the chain too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and it people know, like for example, we all the time we hear, a retailer say, "Oh, I know that this distribution center just performs better. We know the quality of this stuff in it is better versus that one." But why that happens or how to even troubleshoot that problem is kind of one that today has been difficult to solve. And so, yeah, just simply giving folks a little bit more visibility into what's happening on a day-to-day basis has proven to be pretty valuable.
And as you can find ways to really show percentage-wise numbers for these different people in the food chain, that would be tremendous. Are there particular fruits or vegetables that are not being addressed that you think some of these technologies could help?
Yeah, up next, we're going to be doing avocados and mangoes. So, yeah, when you go to the grocery store, the avocados really suck.
Nobody understands that. I sit there in Whole Foods and me and everyone else is looking at the avocados. Nobody knows what's ripe or what's not.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a huge problem, and avocados, I mean, it's a problem in a number of ways, right? Like avocados are expensive, first of all. The second thing is, I'll go to the store, I'll buy 5 avocados, 2 of them go bad before I can unpack my bag, and then the other sit on the shelf for, weeks and weeks. So unless my entire life is based around avocados, I tend to create food waste. And so that makes me feel bad. It's expensive. And it's certainly a problem that needs to be addressed.
I'll diverge for a second. There's a Jerry Seinfeld segment that talks about, or one of his routines. He talks about how stuff you bring into your house is simply in some state of becoming garbage, no matter what it is. And when you talk about the fruit, it makes me think that. In other words, it's you bring it in and you're going to be throwing away a few of them anyway.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know.
So you were talking about avocados, and in some ways you could help monitor those. Another one that you said there's a possible opportunity with is mangoes.
Yeah, absolutely. So bananas, avocados, and mangoes are all ripened at the retailer distribution center. So they actually follow similar supply chains and similar physiologies. And so we can take a lot of what we've learned with banana ripening and apply it to avocados and mangoes. The models that we've built are pretty transferable. The product that we've built is transferable. We use the same sensor technology in order to do this. And mangoes are one of those commodities where if you have a good one, then it's like the best thing in the world. I saw a joke the other day that was like, I've had mangoes that are better than whole years of my existence, but conversely, they can also be a terrible eating experience. So perfecting that ripening process is pretty important for that category as well.
Well, we're really rooting for you, Katherine, and we think that there's great opportunities in the future of fruit monitoring and the other products that you will develop, and we're hopeful that we can be helpful in that process ongoing.
Thank you very much for having me.